The day my boss slid that pay cut document across the table, she thought she had trapped a single mother with nowhere to go. She had no idea that for months, I had been quietly preparing a counterattack so cold, so clean, and so legally precise that the entire company would end up paying for underestimating me. The smile on Brianna Cole's face that day was not loud, but it twisted my stomach as if I had swallowed a piece of ice. She sat behind a polished glass desk where everything looked arranged, controlled, and almost aggressively perfect. Then gently pushed a document toward me. She said the company was restructuring the department budget, that everyone had to make sacrifices so the business could move through a difficult period together. But the number on that paper was not a sacrifice. It was a blade pressed against my life. My daughter's medical care, and every bill I had been counting one by one just to stay afloat. They wanted to cut my compensation by 60%, from $85,000 a year down to $34,000. I looked at the paper, then back at Brianna, wondering how someone could say something so cruel in a voice that smooth. I had been at BrightWave Solutions for 7 years. 7 years of arriving early and leaving late. 7 years of chemical smells clinging to my hair. 7 years of small burns on my hands. 7 years of turning a declining industrial cleaning company into a name major clients trusted. I was not a passive employee collecting a paycheck. I was the person who had built much of the foundation under their recent success. Yet in their eyes, all of that work had become just another expense they could slash. 3 executives sat in the corner watching me. Their expressions, waiting for collapse. They expected me to cry, beg, panic, or sign, because they believed fear had already done their work for them. I did none of those things. I placed my hand on the document, felt the cold smoothness of the paper, and understood the truth of the room. They believed I had no other choice. Brianna tapped one carefully manicured nail against the signature line and said the change would take effect the following month, and that they needed my answer before the end of the week. The way she said answer carried a second meaning: be obedient. Clara Morgan. Because we know you need the money. I did not shake. I did not shout. I did not let tears appear in front of them. Years of being a single mother had taught me that sometimes fear must be folded, locked inside a drawer in the mind, and dealt with later. I said I understood, that I would review the document and respond. Nothing more. When I left that glass-walled conference room, it felt as though I was walking through invisible smoke. People outside were still typing, still making calls, still pouring coffee, but my world had just been deliberately knocked off its axis. I thought of Lily Morgan, my 12-year-old daughter, who was fighting an autoimmune illness that insurance only partly covered. Medical bills arrived with the precision of a clock that had no mercy. BrightWave knew that. They had once sent flowers when Lily was hospitalized. A cheap arrangement that wilted within a day. With a card full of hollow encouragement. Now I understood that they had not only known I was vulnerable, they had calculated around it. In their minds, a mother with a sick child would not risk leaving a job. She would not risk litigation. She would not risk making trouble. They thought my love for Lily would become the chain that kept me fastened to a chair with a gutted salary. What they failed to understand was that a mother's love can also become the sharpest weapon in the world. As I walked toward the parking lot, I held that document like an indictment of their greed. It did not simply say my salary was being reduced. It said they believed I was desperate enough to be bought cheaply. I had seen it coming, though at first only through small cracks. Meetings I had always attended suddenly happened without my name on the invite list. My lab access was limited to strange hours. People asked more questions about how I documented work, where I kept records, and how I reproduced formulas. A few years earlier, I might have told myself I was being too sensitive. But after nights spent beside Lily's hospital bed, after standing at pharmacy counters wondering whether to pay for medicine or electricity first, I no longer had the luxury of being naive. I am a chemist. And good chemists do not only observe reactions in glassware, we observe changes in the environment around us. BrightWave had once been an outdated company with tired products, shrinking clients, and leadership that blamed the market for every failure. When I arrived, I developed an industrial cleaning formula that worked at lower concentration and higher efficiency. Then I kept improving, optimizing, reducing environmental impact, and expanding its uses. Clients returned, contracts grew, new manufacturing capacity followed, and every time executives stood on a stage talking about leadership vision, I stood behind them with solvent still on my hands, clapping like a shadow. If you are listening and you have ever been dismissed while carrying the hardest part of the work, comment the number 1 below so I know you understand this feeling. Sometimes, just seeing that someone else has lived through the same kind of disrespect can make us feel a little less alone. Lily's illness became more serious during my 6th year at BrightWave. From that point on, my life was divided into compartments: work hours, hospital hours, insurance calls, bill calculation, and the time I spent pretending everything was fine so my daughter would not be afraid. I had once asked for a raise, not out of greed, but because I knew the value I created was far beyond the number on my paycheck. I showed revenue, client growth, product impact, and the measurable contribution of the formulas I had developed. They listened with professional faces. Then, offered me a one-time wellness bonus, an amount that covered only a small stretch of medical bills. That same week, at the company holiday party, I overheard Brianna boasting that my division was responsible for 40% of annual revenue. Around her neck was a diamond necklace so bright I could not stop noticing it, and I knew it probably cost more than my yearly salary. That night, after Lily went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out my employment contract. Lily woke in the middle of the night, found me surrounded by papers, and asked if I was worried about money again. A 12-year-old should not know how to read financial fear on her mother's face. I told her everything would be fine. For the first time in months, it was not entirely a lie. In the contract, I found a very specific intellectual property clause. BrightWave owned inventions, discoveries, and formulas created using company facilities and materials during standard business hours. I read that phrase again and again. During standard business hours, using company materials, and for the first time, I saw a door opening in front of me. For years, I had kept a small laboratory at home. It was not fancy, and it looked nothing like the gleaming labs and recruiting brochures, but it was enough for the ideas that came to me while waiting at Lily's appointments. Waking in the middle of the night, or being unable to stop thinking about a reaction that was not yet right. I bought the equipment myself. I bought the materials myself. I kept receipts in old folders. I wrote experiment journals by hand, marked dates in words, and recorded many garage trials so I could compare results later. Several of the most important formulas BrightWave used to transform its business had actually been perfected at home, then recreated at work for official process development. At the time, I had not thought I was protecting myself. I was simply a disciplined scientist who believed every result needed a trace. Every adjustment needed documentation, and every test deserved to be recorded. That habit became my armor. The day after receiving the salary reduction document, I went to work as usual. I smiled at colleagues, completed scheduled tests, and answered emails professionally. But during lunch, I left the building and met Nathan Pierce, a patent attorney I had been quietly consulting for 3 months. He told me everything was ready. The provisional filings had been submitted, and once I gave the word, we would proceed with the full applications. 3 formulas, my 3 strongest achievements. One of them was a cold water industrial cleaning agent that could significantly reduce energy costs for large clients. If this story deserves to reach more people who have been pressured, cornered, or undervalued at work, please give this video a like. Not for me, but for everyone who has been told to be grateful while being treated unfairly. That week, I played the defeated employee so convincingly that even I found it chilling. I met with Brianna and asked for a few more days to think, mentioning Lily's treatment needs as if I were appealing to her compassion. She tilted her head and performed sympathy, but there was calculation in her eyes. She said BrightWave valued my contribution, but business was business. That sentence stayed in my ear all day. Business is business. I repeated it in my mind while reviewing patent documents, checking research journals, sending copies to Nathan, and walking into a meeting with Northbridge Chemicals, BrightWave's largest competitor. The person who received me was Zane Miller, their research director. He did not pity me, and he did not turn my situation into a drama. He reviewed my portfolio, asked sharp technical questions, and said plainly that my work was exceptional. He offered me a senior research director position with a starting salary of $175,000 a year, plus a research budget and my own team. The number made me silent for a few seconds, not because I doubted I deserved it, but because I had been underpaid for so long that fairness felt almost unfamiliar. It was double my current salary and many times higher than what BrightWave was trying to force me to accept. I told him I was interested, but there was something else we needed to discuss first. This was not simply about changing jobs. I needed a place that recognized my intellectual property as mine. And if BrightWave attacked, I needed to know I would not stand alone. Zane listened carefully, then nodded. For the first time in years, I sat in a conference room and did not feel myself shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. On the Tuesday morning before my deadline to answer BrightWave, I prepared as if I were walking into the trial of my own life. I chose a dark green dress that made me feel steady. I fixed my hair neatly and wore the pearl earrings my father had given me before he died. When I dropped Lily at school, she looked at me for a long moment and said I looked pretty, like I was ready to fight somebody. I laughed, but something caught in my chest. Children see far more than adults think they do. I arrived at BrightWave headquarters at 9:30 in the morning. The receptionist, who had watched me drag myself into that building before dawn for years, glanced up briefly and looked back down at her screen. I went straight to the executive floor, a place where I had rarely been invited, even though my work was often discussed there. Brianna's assistant tried to stop me, saying she was in a meeting. I did not stop. I opened the conference room door. Brianna was seated with 8 executives, and their annoyed faces turned toward me as though I were a stain on glass they had just polished. Brianna said my name sharply and told me they were in the middle of something. I replied that this would only take a minute. I walked to her place at the table and set a thick envelope in front of her. She asked whether it was my acceptance of their offer. I said not exactly. It was a licensing agreement. The air in the room changed immediately. I looked at each of them and explained that if BrightWave wanted to continue using my proprietary formulas, including the core formulas and the new cold water formula they had not yet seen, they would have to pay licensing fees. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The truth was heavy enough to echo on its own. Graham Reed, the legal director, was the first to recover his voice. He laughed dismissively and said my formulas belonged to BrightWave because my employment contract made that clear. Calmly, I finished the most important part of that sentence for him. The contract covered inventions created using company facilities and materials during standard business hours. Then I placed a second envelope on the table. Inside were copies of provisional patent filings, home laboratory journals, material receipts, equipment photos, test data, and video records showing development outside company time and resources. Brianna opened the envelope. The color drained from her face little by little. My licensing agreement was simple. BrightWave could continue using each formula for a monthly fee of $4,250. Exactly the amount they had tried to cut from my monthly income. Brianna stammered that this was absurd. I said it was possible. And it had already happened. They had 2 choices: sign the licensing agreement or reformulate their entire product line. I reminded them that the second option could cost millions in research, manufacturing changes, retesting, recertification, and, most importantly, a client loss during transition. The executives looked at one another. They knew I was right. My formulas were the backbone of BrightWave's recent growth. If you are following this story and want to hear more about how workers protect themselves from quiet coercion and corporate pressure, and subscribe to the channel right now. Stories like this are not just entertainment. They remind us that silence is not the only option. Graham threatened to take me to court. I nodded. because that was exactly the response I had expected. I told them they could sue, but discovery would be interesting. Emails about how to push me out while keeping my work. Conversations about my daughter's illness making me financially vulnerable. Internal notes about restricting my lab access before presenting the salary reduction. To be honest, I did not have all of those emails, but I saw their reactions. And their reactions told me those emails existed. For several seconds, the conference room was so quiet I could hear the air system running. Brianna stood abruptly, her chair scraping hard against the floor, and ordered everyone out except me. When the door closed, her polished executive mask fell away. She asked if I had any idea what I had done. She said BrightWave had given me opportunities, that they had made me. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because I realized people can tell themselves a false story for so long that they start believing it. I told her I had created more than $40 million in value for the company, while they paid me less than 1% of that. I had worked weekends, holidays, and even carried research notes into hospitals while Lily slept after treatment. They knew I was devoted. And they had turned that devotion into something to exploit. Brianna asked whether this was revenge. I looked directly at her and said no. This was business. Just like cutting my pay had been business. Brianna narrowed her eyes, her voice dropping into a threat. She said BrightWave had resources I could not imagine. That they could drag me into a legal battle so long, I would collapse before I ever won. If I had been the Clara of a few years earlier, I might have been afraid. But the Clara, sitting across from her that day, had spent months staring directly at the worst possible outcomes. I told her there were several reasons they should think carefully. First, I had already accepted a research director position at Northbridge Chemicals at double my current salary. Second, my new employment contract recognized my ownership of the existing patents and contained an aggressive legal defense clause if anyone challenged them. Third, the cold water formula BrightWave had never seen was already of great interest to Northbridge, and they were prepared to invest in bringing it to market. I took my BrightWave badge from my bag and placed it beside the licensing agreement. That small piece of plastic had once represented safety, insurance, Lily's medication, and the feeling that I could not leave. Now it was just an object on a table. I told Brianna they had until the end of the week to decide. After that, the rate would increase. I also informed her that I had spoken with Victor Hale and Marcus Bennett, two of the most influential board members. They were very concerned about potential disruption to the business and wanted to understand why a key employee had been handled this way. I watched anger harden Brianna's face. She said I would never work in the industry again. I smiled. For the first time in years, her threats could not reach me. Before I left the room, I stopped at the door and told Brianna that Lily would begin a new treatment plan the following month. Thanks to my new job, I could afford it without staying awake over every bill. I said that in a strange way. Perhaps I should thank her. That insulting offer had finally forced me to recognize my own worth. I walked out of BrightWave headquarters for the last time as one of their employees, and it felt as if I had set down a backpack full of stones I had carried for 7 years. My phone buzzed. Zane had texted that the contract was ready and the team was excited to meet me on Monday. That afternoon, I picked Lily up from school earlier than usual. She was surprised and asked why I was not at work. I told her I had a new job, a better one, and that we should celebrate. Lily did not ask about title or salary. Her first question was whether this meant we could finally adopt a dog. I laughed. A real laugh. I had not heard from myself in a long time. I said maybe we could. 2 days later, BrightWave's legal team contacted Nathan to accept my licensing terms. 1 week after that, Brianna was removed from her division director position after the board expanded its investigation. 3 weeks later, Lily began her new treatment, and I sat beside her without guilt for taking time away from work. Some revolutions do not begin with shouting. They begin with a woman sitting quietly, reading a contract carefully, keeping receipts, and deciding that her silence will no longer mean obedience. My first day at Northbridge Chemicals felt like stepping into a version of my life I had never dared to imagine. Zane did not wait for me in his powerful office. He came down to the lobby to greet me. a small gesture that said more than he probably realized. He introduced me to the research department with a sentence that made me swallow hard. This is the innovator who will help us reshape the market. Not support staff. Not the person in the lab. Not a name forgotten in the acknowledgments. He opened the door to my new office and laboratory. The space was twice the size of my old one and had been prepared according to the specifications I had sent. 4 researchers were waiting for me. 2 women and 2 men. Each with expertise that complemented mine. This was my team. Not me supporting someone else's team. Mine? The feeling was strange and almost painful. A researcher named Maya Brooks said she had read my cold water formula proposal and thought the molecular architecture was brilliant. She had some ideas about stabilization if I was open to collaboration. Collaboration. Not credit theft. Not someone quietly placing another name above mine. Actual scientific exchange. All day. I kept waiting for the trap. The hidden agenda. The price attached to being treated decently. There was none. That evening, when I picked Lily up from my neighbor's house, she studied my face and said I looked different. I asked different how. She said I looked like I had the time we went to the ocean. When I took off my shoes and ran into the edge of the waves, laughing, as if I had forgotten every bill in the world. Children see what adults try to hide. And Lily saw me beginning to return to myself. On the way home that evening, we stopped at an animal rescue shelter. At first, I only meant to look. But then a one-eared shepherd mix named Scout leaned against Lily's leg and looked up at us with hopeful amber eyes. Some decisions seem enormous until they arrive. And then they are simple. Lily bent down to stroke Scout's back, and I watched my daughter's face brighten, in a way illness had stolen from her for too long. While we filled out the adoption paperwork, Lily whispered, asking if this was really happening. I told her it was. New job. New dog. New chapter. That night, Scout curled at the foot of Lily's bed, and I stood in the doorway watching my daughter sleep. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel proud, not only because I had outmaneuvered BrightWave, but because I had stood up in a way Lily could learn from. My phone lit up with a message from Nathan. He said the board investigation at BrightWave was expanding. There were rumors of a financial review, and I had started an avalanche. I had not entered this situation intending to bring down my old company. I only wanted what was rightfully mine. But systems built on exploitation have weak foundations. Push in the right place, and the cracks spread. Over the next few weeks, I settled into Northbridge. My team refined the cold water formula for industrial use, and Zane fast-tracked it toward production. At the same time, Lily began responding well to the biologic treatment that insurance had once dismissed as experimental. For the first time, I did not look at a medical bill as if it were a sentence. I thought the BrightWave chapter was finished. I was wrong. A call from an unfamiliar number came while I was in the lab, and the woman on the line introduced herself as Iris Lane, a young chemist still working at BrightWave. As soon as Iris said she worked at BrightWave, my body raised its defenses. I asked how she had gotten my number. She said through Helen Ward in Human Resources, then quickly explained that she was not calling on behalf of the company. She was calling because people in the lab had heard about the patents and the licensing agreement, and BrightWave was now trying to recreate my formulas so they could avoid paying me. I stepped away from the shared work area and lowered my voice. That did not surprise me. But Iris said the worrying part was that Graham was pressuring the research team to reverse engineer my work, forcing double shifts. And when someone mentioned that this might violate my patents, he said they only needed to change enough to get around the legal details. Heat moved through my blood, but I kept my voice steady. I asked why she was telling me. Iris was quiet for a moment. Then she said because it was wrong. Because she had heard what they had done to me. They heard how they had tried to cut my salary while knowing about Lily's illness. Then she said her sister had lupus. So she knew what bills like that looked like. After the call, I contacted Nathan immediately. He was not surprised. He said this was the standard playbook for companies in that position, find a workaround different enough to claim it was not infringement. I asked if they could do that. Nathan said possibly, because patent protection covered specific formulations. But if they changed enough, they might create a new version on paper. That evening, I could barely taste dinner. Lily asked if work was okay while secretly sliding a piece of chicken to Scout under the table. I told her it was a puzzle I was trying to solve. She asked if it was a science puzzle or a people puzzle. I smiled. Both. After Lily went to bed, I spread my personal research notebooks across the kitchen table. Not the official records from BrightWave, but my private notes from all the nights I had worked at home. Looking through them, I realized what the patent filings did not fully show. My formulas were not just ratios of chemicals. They were a system of thought. The way I selected surfactants, balanced performance with environmental impact, predicted secondary reactions under different industrial conditions, and designed for stability, formed a framework BrightWave could not copy simply by swapping a few ingredients. If they wanted to play the workaround game, I needed to think wider than they did. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Zane and Northbridge's legal team. I explained Iris's call, the risk that BrightWave would try to avoid the patents, and a new proposal. The 3 patented formulas were valuable, but they were still separate solutions. What if we created an integrated cleaning system combining the principles of all 3 formulas with new elements that worked synergistically? Then BrightWave would not be facing one formula to imitate, they would be facing an entire architecture. The legal director leaned forward and said I was talking about building a moat around my intellectual property. I said exactly. Zane studied my notes for a long time, then said this was bigger than defense. An integrated system could change the way industrial clients operated, lower costs, simpler training, reduced water use, lower energy demands, and better surface longevity. He asked how long I needed. I said with dedicated resources, about 3 months. Zane did not bargain or minimize the challenge. He simply said I would have whatever I needed. For the next 12 weeks, I lived almost entirely inside the integrated system concept. Unlike my years at BrightWave, I did not have to carry the work silently on my back and watch someone else claim it. At Northbridge, everyone on my team had a defined voice. Maya focused on molecular stabilization. A process engineer named Oliver Grant optimized deployment at plant scale. Iris, after leaving BrightWave and joining us, brought deep polymer expertise that helped the system adhere to surfaces better while still rinsing cleanly. I coordinated, challenged, tested, documented, and for the first time understood that research leadership did not mean standing above people. It meant creating a space where everyone's intelligence could collide without being swallowed by ego or fear. During that same period, Lily changed too. The new treatment began working. Her color improved, the shadows under her eyes faded, and her energy returned little by little. She joined the science club at school and began talking about becoming a veterinarian. One evening, while I reviewed data at the dining table, Lily sat across from me doing homework. Suddenly, she asked if I was happier now. After everything, I put down my pen and looked at her carefully. She said that before, I always looked tired and worried, even when I smiled. But now I seemed more like myself. Her words reached the softest place in me. BrightWave had diminished me not only financially, but spiritually. I had learned to bend down so I could fit inside the room they allowed me to occupy. I told Lily I was happier. Standing up for myself had been frightening, but it had been right. 2 days after that conversation, Lily came home with a bruised eye. I nearly dropped my bag when I saw her standing in the doorway, trying to look normal while her mouth trembled slightly. I asked what happened while grabbing an ice pack and lifting her chin. Lily said, a boy named Noah Brooks had told Emily Carter she could not join their science project because girls were not good at chemistry. Lily told him that was stupid because her mother was a chemist and brilliant. Noah said she was lying. She opened the Northbridge website and showed him my picture. But he said, I probably just mixed things men had invented. I felt anger run along my spine. I asked what happened then. Lily lowered her eyes and admitted she had punched him in the stomach, which was the wrong choice because Noah was bigger. And when he shoved her back, she fell against a desk. I held the ice pack to her eye. caught between disapproval of violence and fierce pride, that my daughter had refused to accept contempt. I began to say that fighting was usually not the answer. Lily looked at me and repeated my own words. Sometimes the scary thing is the right thing. I could not use my own lesson to defeat her. I only held her and said courage needed wisdom beside it. The next week, our integrated system was ready for field testing. I suggested 3 manufacturing plants, including one client that had recently left BrightWave. The results exceeded even our expectations. The system reduced cleaning time by 40%, lowered water use by 60%, and significantly improved surface longevity. Client feedback was almost euphoric. When Zane called me into his office to review the data, he said it was extraordinary. I said the team deserved most of the credit. He corrected me, the team I had built and led. Zane handed me the notice for a special innovation bonus approved by the board. I looked at the number and blinked. It was not like the symbolic bonuses BrightWave had used to silence me. It was calculated according to the projected value the system would create. Zane said simply that at Northbridge, innovation was rewarded appropriately. I brought the notice home, not to impress Lily with a number, but to tell her that work could be recognized properly in a healthy place. That weekend, Iris called me from her personal number. She said BrightWave was panicking. News of Northbridge's new system had spread. 3 major clients had requested meetings, and 2 others had paused their BrightWave contracts while waiting to compare options. I could not help asking how Brianna was taking it. Iris said Brianna was gone. The board investigation had uncovered financial misconduct beyond what happened to me. Graham was acting as interim leader, but he was flailing. Lab morale had collapsed, and 6 researchers had left within the month. I listened with complicated feelings. Satisfaction. Yes. But also sadness for the good people still trapped inside a bad system. I asked Iris why she was still there. She was silent for a long time, then said she needed the job because of her sister's treatment costs. I understood that sentence too well. I told her to send me her resume. 2 weeks later, Iris joined my team at Northbridge. When I introduced her to everyone, the gratitude in her eyes reminded me that this had never been only about revenge. It was about building a place where talent was seen, innovation was paid for, and people were not forced to choose between dignity and medicine for their families. 3 months after the integrated system launched, BrightWave approached Northbridge with an acquisition offer. When Zane invited me into the meeting with their representatives, I was not surprised. But I still felt a circle closing. The people who came were not Graham, but Victor Hale and Marcus Bennett from the board. Victor nodded to me and said I had been busy. I replied that I was just doing my job, a properly compensated one. Marcus almost smiled. They said BrightWave had made serious management changes, that the board was now more involved, and that they recognized mistakes had been made. The negotiations continued for weeks. The biggest difference was that this time I was in every meeting. My opinions were not dismissed as emotional. My analysis was not repeated by someone else and claimed as theirs. I was asked which departments should be retained, how intellectual property should be reassessed, and how research culture should be rebuilt so the old failures were not repeated. In the end, the deal was structured for Northbridge to acquire BrightWave while keeping it as a separate brand serving a different market segment. After the terms were finalized, Zane told me they wanted me to oversee research and development for both divisions, with the corresponding title and compensation. Director of Research and Development across both companies, triple my original BrightWave salary, full creative control. When I told Lily, she high-fived me so hard, my palm stung. Then she immediately asked whether Scout could have a friend. I laughed and said we should see how Scout felt about that. My daughter had learned that victory was not only escaping the place that hurt you. Sometimes victory meant returning, no longer as a victim, but as the person with the authority to change it. My first day back in the BrightWave building, as a leader, felt almost surreal. I walked through the lobby where I had once dragged myself in before sunrise, then took the elevator to the executive floor. I was no longer someone being summoned to receive orders. I was there to set direction. The research team gathered in the main conference room, familiar faces showing anxiety, curiosity, caution, and in some cases, the shame of people who had stayed silent, while the old culture crushed others. I told them I knew there had been uncertainty, but the changes ahead were necessary and overdue. BrightWave would become a place where innovation was credited properly, where work-life balance was not just a sentence in an employee handbook, and where compensation reflected real contribution. I also said some people had known what was wrong and said nothing. Some had participated in the old system, and others had been trapped in it just as I had been. I was not interested in nursing grudges. I was interested in building something better. 1 year after Brianna slid that pay cut document toward me, I sat in my new office overlooking the city. On my desk was a photo of Lily with our 2 dogs. Beside a small plaque my team had given me, "The quietest revolutions are the most profound." BrightWave had changed. Toxic leaders were gone. Exploitative practices had been dismantled. We built a research scholarship program for scientists with family caregiving responsibilities. My first initiative in the new role, Lily was healthier, excelling in science, and I no longer stayed awake at night because of medical bills. If this story reaches something in you, remember that your worth is not determined by people who profit from underpaying you. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below to tell me how you once had to stand up for your own value.